I think about most of the work that I make in terms of drawing, although most of it has a dimensional quality. It could be considered sculpture, it could be considered social practice, but I'm positioned toward my work as a person who draws. And I think about building the work from that. It's motivated from that sort of seat of practice. I also love to use found materials, but I don't talk about them or use them in that way. Like they tend to be transformed from their found state, if you will. So it's a little bit different than a conceptual move where I'm just changing the location or the site of something to help you understand it differently. Although that is certainly part of the way that I work. In the body of work that I have been in since 2018, it's called Migration Studies, has started to kind of have two different branches recently. One branch of that work is very much oriented around objects that I find in the beauty supply shop, or objects who have had a life around that kind of place, that identity place. They carry an aesthetic, and the places where you purchase them, there's an economy and there's a politic around the economies of location and place. And that's what I mean when I say the things happening outside of the studio, I'm bringing into the studio and into the work. It's not so much just like observing something and then bringing that as a direct translation one-to-one, but making sure that the things that are happening in my studio are connected sort of umbilically, if you will, to the places and sites that I'm interested in exploring beyond the studio. The way I work with materials and the process are often more important to me than the outcome. I think a lot about beauty in my work in the absence of prettiness. And so regardless of the materials that I'm working with, for example, if I'm working with hair nets and I'm making an attempt to sort of freeze them in place and then put them in sequence or series to suggest maybe like a cinematic motion or movement or a biological sort of idea, looking into a petri dish and trying to understand this object that is so tied to hair and also labor. I think that those material qualities are really important to me. I'm combining those hair nets with yellow tracing paper. So really functional materials, really low brow materials, quote unquote. The tracing paper in terms of process is something that would usually be invisible to the end, the end viewer. But it's such a part of the labor for trying to reproduce something. And so what I like about the yellow tracing paper in particular is that it points to that attempt to reproduce exactly. And then by coupling that with something like a hairnet that I'm constantly trying to manipulate into a shape or a form that I can't ever quite repeat, there's an interesting conversation to me that begins to happen in that work. Weaving and weaving into paper. The paper that I'm working with is a kozo paper. It's a mulberry paper. It's inherent to printmaking, thought of as an Eastern paper. And the hair that I'm using to weave into that is synthetic hair, synthetic black hair that I procure from the beauty supply store, so bundles. The paper, in terms of process, when I cut into it to create sort of the framework of weaving, renders that paper sort of unusable. And then I use the weaving to essentially put it back together. So there's this like disassembly and assembly that happens in that work. And it's that sort of pointing toward the ongoing ability to transform oneself at will that is exciting to me about that particular material. The sort of other branch of my practice in this moment, I'm working with a process, I guess, of creating what I'm calling documentary object-based portraits. And I'm using those found materials, caps, rollers, combs, pins, I mean, everything that you can think of that is inherent to the Black beauty supply store and subsequently present in a lot of Black homes where people are doing Black hair. That those objects have a way of pointing to an identity of a person and a place and a culture that is so much about interiority in the sense that it doesn't have a very big public life. These are things maybe in your bathroom or in your drawer. You wear in the privacy of your home or with close families and friends. But again, this idea of trying to like reproduce or create a sense of, cull together a sense of identity and representation that has nothing to do with sort of an external gaze. And so assembling those objects is very much an act of drawing, thinking about how the texture and the lines work and all of those aspects and components. But in this particular approach to practice, I'm also thinking very deeply about how it can point to a specific person. And so from these highly sort of personal object-based biographic portraits that I created, that large set, I'm moving into making portraits like that in collaboration with people so that I can understand their stories and the stories that the objects in their world might carry. So in a salon or in a home, or somebody who just, has been doing their own hair for their whole life. And it's sort of that leveling that I love about this work. It's a real connection point and a real point of solidarity within Black culture a lot of times. And I think that I would love to try to be able to capture that aspect of the work, or that aspect of the community in the work. Ultimately, in my imagination at this point, those portraits will become the property of the person that I co-authored them with. And then we would be able potentially to lend them out as a set to a museum and create a different kind of dialogue around who gets represented, how it gets represented and when, and how that credit goes back. So these objects would exist ideally in the places where they were made, and there will be conversations and all those things, but then they will have a different life within contemporary art, and I kind of love that dialogue. I mention often that I work in both visual and social forms, and projects like KS MoCA or the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. School Museum of Contemporary Art here in Northeast Portland in Dr. MLK Jr. Elementary School is a project that I co-founded in 2014 with my colleague Harold Fletcher, and I continue to co-direct that project today. That project is an attempt to build essentially a contemporary art museum space inside and alongside a functioning public school, collaborating with the students and the teachers and the staff and the families to join components of life and community that are typically kept at a distance from one another. I think that work is very much motivated by the same desires that my studio-based work is motivated by, which really is an act of questioning. Who gets to see contemporary artwork? Who gets to make it? How do you begin to understand that it's something valuable or valid in the world at all? When do you become exposed to these ideas, and what does it mean to learn or have contact or access to something from an early place in life as opposed to declaring a major, for example, when you start higher education? Community, to me, here and now in Portland, is about the neighborhood where I live. I live in the neighborhood of Dr. MLK Jr. School. It is about the people that I work with on a regular basis. I'm very, very much attached to the children that I work with, my college students as well. And when I think about what I take with me, or what is mobile within that, sort of like how the migration works, it's also learning to be aware in the present tense, like what you have right now, how you can hold that and how that moves with you. In the context of my background as a person who is descended from people who were enslaved in this country, what I have been able to have and keep in terms of geography and place has nothing to do with ancestral homeland. It has everything to do with how community moves with you, how it's carried in story, in song, in maybe even very physically. I do a lot of braiding in my work and thinking about African women years ago, and still, but years ago, braiding things like rice and money into their children's hair so that they would have a resource that came from their community to survive, even this idea of a seed or a kernel of survival. I think that the dominant question for me in my work right now is what will set you free? And in terms of a precipice, it feels like I'm ready to discover something new within that set of inquiry or questions. I'm excited to have resources and time in a way I don't think I've ever had. And I'm also really excited to sort of be able to understand what an accumulation and a body of work, being an artist over time, looks like. Who knows, who thinks they will ever be in a position to think that way. But I'm approaching the age and sort of experience level that a lot of my mentors were at the time that I was meeting them. And I feel just really honored and excited to be at that next stage and to find out what's there. I like the unknowing.